You came back. I made you a promise. She is nothing, a cursed orphan with tainted blood. The boy you saved died in those northern mountains. What returned is something else entirely. I waited for you. Every single day I waited. Then your waiting is over. You cannot claim her. The council will never allow. I am not asking for permission. The healing tent smelled of yarrow and impending death. Elowen moved between the cots with practiced efficiency, her hands never trembling even when the wounds beneath her fingers were grievous enough to make seasoned warriors look away. She packed a poultice against the gash running from a young soldier's shoulder to his hip, ignoring the way he whimpered through clenched teeth. "Hold still," she murmured. "The sting means it is working." "You have a cruel definition of comfort," he managed, sweat beading on his pale forehead. "I have an honest one." She tied off the bandage and moved to the next cot before he could respond. This was her domain. Among the blood and the suffering, Elowen was not the cursed girl with no family name. She was not the orphan who had been passed between households like an unwanted heirloom. Here, she was simply the healer who could pull men back from death's threshold when others had already begun preparing burial rites. "Finished already?" Head healer Marin appeared at the tent's entrance, her gray hair escaping its braid, exhaustion carved into every line of her weathered face. "The supply cart arrived. Needs unloading before the rain hits." "I will handle it." Elowen stepped out into the overcast afternoon, stretching muscles that ached from hours of crouching over broken bodies. The Thornhaven Pack compound sprawled before her. Stone buildings clustered around a central square, training grounds to the east, the Alpha's hall dominating the northern ridge. She had lived here for 12 years. It had never felt like home. The supply cart waited near the storage houses, and Elowen was halfway there when a familiar voice sliced through the gray air. "Look who crawled out of her cave of dying men." Elowen did not slow her pace. She knew that voice the way prey animals knew the sound of snapping twigs. Seraphine descended the steps of the weaving house, flanked by two other women whose names Elowen had never bothered to learn. The Alpha's niece moved with the liquid grace of someone who had never worked a day in her existence. Her copper hair arranged in elaborate coils that must have taken hours to perfect. "I hear you lost another one this morning," Seraphine continued, positioning herself directly in Elowen's path. "The merchant's son. His mother is devastated. His wounds were 3 days old and already putrid when they brought him to me." Elowen's voice remained level. "I am a healer, not a miracle worker." "Are you certain?" Seraphine tilted her head, false sympathy dripping from every word. "Because the elders seem to think you are something else entirely." What was the word they used? "Ah, yes." She smiled, showing teeth. "Cursed." The women behind her tittered. Elowen felt the old familiar heat rise up her spine, but she had learned years ago that fire only fed these creatures. Any spark of anger was kindling for their entertainment. "If you will excuse me," she said flatly, "supplies need unloading." She moved to step around Seraphine, but a hand shot out, gripping her arm with claws extended just enough to dimple the skin. "My uncle has been asking about you," Seraphine murmured, her voice dropping to something intimate and cruel. "About why he keeps a cursed, bloodless orphan in his compound when everyone knows your presence invites misfortune. I have been running out of reasons to defend you." "I was not aware you ever started." Seraphine's claws pressed deeper, and Elowen felt the warm trickle of blood beneath her sleeve. "Theron may find your sharp tongue charming," Seraphine hissed, "but he will tire of you eventually. They always do. And when he discards you, there will be no one left to speak for your place here. Remember that, the next time you think yourself clever." She released Elowen's arm and swept past, her entourage following like well-trained shadows. Elowen stood motionless until they disappeared around the corner of the Alpha's hall. Only then did she allow herself to look at her arm, at the 4 crescent marks weeping red, and feel the exhaustion that went deeper than muscle and bone. 12 years. 12 years of proving herself indispensable. 12 years of swallowing insults and bleeding quietly and being grateful for scraps of tolerance. 12 years of waiting for something she had stopped believing would ever come. I will return for you. The memory surfaced unbidden, a boy's voice, rough with youth and fierce with conviction. Eyes the color of winter storms, a promise made in the dark of a root cellar while snow howled outside and death hunted close behind. Iloan shook her head, banishing the ghost. That boy was gone. Dead in the northern mountains most likely, or swallowed by a world that devoured abandoned strays without a second thought. She was alone. She had always been alone. The supply cart waited, and the rain was coming, and there was no room in her life for childish memories of promises that would never be kept. She walked toward the cart, unaware that at that very moment, 3 riders had crossed the eastern border into Thornhaven territory, and the one who led them had eyes the color of winter storms. 12 years earlier, the blizzard had been hunting for 3 days. Iloan, 10 years old and too stubborn for her own survival, had ventured out to check the trap lines despite Widow Helda's warnings. The old woman who had taken her in that winter was kind, but frail, and they needed meat if they were going to survive until the thaw. She found the traps empty and the way home swallowed by white. By the time she stumbled into the abandoned root cellar carved into the hillside, her fingers had gone numb and her thoughts had begun to blur at the edges, the dreaming warmth that preceded freezing death. She almost missed him entirely. A shape in the corner, curled tight against the frozen earth. So still she thought it was a dead animal until it moved. Not an animal. A boy. He was perhaps her age, perhaps younger. It was impossible to tell beneath the dirt and blood and bruises that painted his skin in shades of violence. His clothes were rags, his feet were bare, and when his eyes opened at her approach, they held the flat emptiness of something that had already accepted death. "Go away," he rasped. Iloan did not go away. She crawled to his side, pulling off her own thin coat to wrap around his shoulders despite the cold that immediately sank its teeth into her bones. She found the emergency pack she had learned to carry: flint, dried meat, a water skin that had not yet frozen solid, and pressed strips of venison to cracked lips until he ate. "Who did this to you?" she asked. He did not answer, but something in his gaze shifted, the emptiness cracking just slightly to reveal a rage so vast it seemed impossible that such a small body could contain it. "They killed my mother." The words came out broken, jagged. "My father's men. They called her a traitor. They called me an abomination. They left me in the snow to die." Iloan did not understand pack politics or the brutality of succession wars. She only understood that this boy was broken and freezing and alone, and she knew exactly how that felt. "I will not let you die," she said. He laughed, a terrible sound, more so than humor. "Why? You do not know me. I know enough." She stayed with him through the night, sharing body heat when the cold grew unbearable, feeding the tiny fire she managed to coax from damp wood, talking to keep him awake when his eyes began to drift closed. She told him about Widow Helda, about the parents she had never known, about the curse the village whispered followed her wherever she went, bringing misfortune to anyone foolish enough to care for her. "They are wrong," the boy said, his voice stronger now, steadier. "You are not cursed. You are the only good thing that has happened to me in my entire life." 3 days later, when the blizzard finally broke, he was strong enough to stand. "I have to go," he told her. And there was something different in his bearing, a straightness to his spine, a hardness in his jaw that had not been there before. "There are people in the north who owe my mother debts. I will find them. I will grow strong, and I will take back everything that was stolen from me." Iloan felt something crack in her chest. She had known him for only 3 days, but the thought of returning to her life of solitude and whispered curses seemed unbearable now. "Will you come back?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. The boy turned to her. In the pale morning light, his eyes burned with a fire that made him look older than his years, ancient almost, forged by suffering into something that would not break again. "I will come back," he said, "and when I do, I will be Alpha. I will have power and land and an army at my command. And I will claim you, Elowen. I will make you mine, and no one will ever call you cursed again." He pressed something into her palm, a wooden carving, rough but recognizable, a wolf, howling at an unseen moon. "Keep this, so you remember." Then he walked into the snow-bright morning and disappeared beyond the ridge. Elowen clutched the carving until her fingers ached. She never even learned his name. Present day. "You are distracted tonight." Theron's voice pulled Elowen back to the present, to the fire-lit hall and the meal she had barely touched, to the man seated across from her whose handsomeness had long since stopped mattering. "Forgive me." She forced a small smile. Long day in the healing tents. Theron studied her with eyes the color of autumn bark, warm on the surface but calculating beneath. He was the Alpha's nephew by marriage, not blood, but close enough to power to matter, close enough to grant protection to a cursed orphan healer who had no other options. "You work too hard." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "When we are mated, you will not need to spend your days elbow-deep in blood and filth." When, not if. Theron had been speaking this way for months now, as if their union were already decided, as if her consent were merely a formality to be handled at his convenience. Elowen had not agreed to anything, but she had not refused either, because refusing meant losing his protection, and losing his protection meant Seraphine would finally have the leverage to cast her out of Thornhaven entirely. "I like my work," she said carefully. "You like being needed." Theron smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "That will change once you have pups to tend instead of strangers." Something cold moved through Elowen's stomach. She extracted her hand gently, reaching for her cup. "The claiming ceremony is not for another month. There is time to discuss." "Actually?" Theron leaned back, his smile widening. "That is what I wish to tell you. I spoke with my uncle today. He has agreed to move the ceremony forward." Elowen's cup froze halfway to her lips. "Forward? To when?" "The next crescent moon. 4 days from now." The hall seemed to tilt. Elowen set the cup down carefully, afraid she might shatter it in her grip. "4 days," she repeated. "I see no reason to wait." Theron was watching her closely now, that calculating edge fully visible. "Unless you have objections?" She had 1,000 objections. She had 12 years of hoping for something else, someone else. A promise made by a starving boy who had probably died before ever reaching the northern mountains. But hope did not feed empty bellies. Hope did not shield against winter winds or pack politics or copper-haired women with claws that drew blood. "No," she heard herself say. "No objections." Theron's smile turned satisfied in a way that made her skin crawl. "Excellent. I will make the arrangements." He rose, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt more like a brand, and left her alone with the remains of a meal she could not stomach. 4 days. Elowen stared into the fire, her hand moving unconsciously to the cord around her neck, to the small wooden wolf that hung hidden beneath her dress. She had worn it every day for 12 years. A child's keepsake, a fool's hope. He is not coming. He was never coming. You need to let go. Congratulations are in order, I hear. Elowen looked up to find a young woman settling onto the bench across from her. Brinley, a kitchen servant with clever eyes and a talent for hearing things she should not. Word travels fast. Word travels at whatever speed Theron wishes it to. Brinley glanced around, then leaned closer. You should know something. There is talk in the Alpha's hall tonight. Riders crossed the eastern border this afternoon. 3 of them. Travelers pass through often enough. Not like these. Brinley's voice dropped lower. They carry the banner of the Northern Dominion. The Alpha has called an emergency council. No one knows why, but... She hesitated, something strange flickering across her face. The servants who saw them say their leader is young, tall, dark-haired. And his eyes? Elowen's heart stopped. What about his eyes? Brinley shook her head slowly. They said his eyes looked like a winter storm, and when he spoke his name, half the council went pale as death. Elowen could not breathe. What name? She whispered. Brinley met her gaze. Kale, High Alpha of the Northern Dominion. The boy who was supposed to have died in the mountains 12 years ago. The wooden wolf beneath Elowen's dress seemed to burn against her skin. He came back. Elowen did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow cot in the healer's quarters, staring at the ceiling beams, turning the wooden wolf over and over in her fingers until the familiar grooves felt raw against her skin. Kale. She had never known his name. For 12 years he had simply been the boy. A memory wrapped in blizzard winds and desperate hope, fading more with each passing season until she had almost convinced herself she had imagined him entirely. But he was real. He was here. And he was High Alpha of the Northern Dominion, which meant he commanded the largest, most powerful territory in all the known lands. He came back. The thought should have filled her with joy. Instead, it sat heavy in her chest like a stone. 12 years was a long time. People changed. Boys who made promises in root cellars grew into men with kingdoms and armies, and responsibilities far greater than childhood vows to cursed orphan girls. He probably did not even remember her. The next morning, Elowen caught her first glimpse of him. She was crossing the central square when the doors of the Alpha's hall opened and the council emerged, their faces tight with expressions she could not read. And there, among them, walking beside Alpha Brennan himself. Her breath stopped. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered and lean with the coiled grace of a predator at rest. His dark hair fell past his jaw, and his face had sharpened into angles that spoke of hardship survived and enemies conquered. But his eyes were exactly as she remembered, winter storms given flesh, gray and fierce and burning with an intensity that made the air feel thin. As if sensing her gaze, his head turned. Across the crowded square, through the chaos of morning activity, his eyes found hers. Elowen felt the world narrow to a single point. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her hand flew to the cord at her neck, to the wooden wolf hidden beneath her dress. Does he recognize me? Does he remember? Something flickered across his face. A crack in the stone mask, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Then Theron appeared at her elbow, his grip closing around her arm with bruising force. There you are. His voice was pleasant, but his fingers dug into the same wounds Seraphine had left the day before. Come, we have preparations to discuss. He steered her away before she could protest, before she could look back, before she could see if those winter storm eyes followed her retreat. You have been distant since last night. Theron's private chambers smelled of cedar oil and something underneath, something cloying that made Elowen's stomach turn. I am simply tired. She kept her voice even. The healing tents have been demanding. The healing tents. Theron circled her slowly, his footsteps soft against the stone floor. You will not need to concern yourself with them much longer. After the claiming, your duties will be different. What duties? He stopped behind her, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. A mate's duties, bearing pups, managing my household, representing my interests at court. His hand settled on her shoulder, thumb pressing against the bruises hidden beneath her sleeve. You should be grateful, Elowen. No one else would have you. I am offering you legitimacy, protection, a name. A cage, she thought. You are offering me a cage. But she said nothing, because saying something meant consequences, and consequences meant losing the fragile ground beneath her feet. The Northern Alpha, she said instead, testing carefully. I heard he arrived yesterday. Do you know why he has come? Theron's grip tightened painfully. That is not your concern. I was only curious. Curiosity is dangerous for women in your position. He released her abruptly, stepping back. The claiming is in 3 days. I suggest you focus on that, rather than matters above your station. He left without another word, and Elowen stood frozen in the silence, her arm throbbing, her chest tight with a dread she could not name. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And she was running out of time to discover what. The 3 days passed like water through clenched fingers. Elowen tried twice more to approach the northern delegation, and twice more she was intercepted, once by Seraphine, who smiled with poison-sweet concern and suggested she focus on her upcoming happiness, and once by Theron himself, who said nothing but whose grip on her arm left bruises that took 2 days to fade. She did not see Kale again, not in the square, not in the halls, not anywhere her limited movements allowed her to wander. It was as if he had vanished, or as if someone was deliberately keeping them apart. On the morning of the claiming ceremony, Brinley found her in the healing tents. You need to leave. The kitchen servant's face was pale, her hands trembling. Tonight, before the ceremony. I can help you reach the Eastern Road. What are you talking about? I heard them. Brinley glanced toward the tent entrance, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Theron and the Alpha. Last night in the council chamber. They were discussing the northern delegation and... She swallowed hard. Elowen, Theron does not intend to keep you. The ground seemed to shift beneath Elowen's feet. What? He is using you. The claiming, the ceremony. It is all a performance. He plans to reject you publicly during the ceremony itself. He has already arranged a match with a merchant's daughter from the Western Vale. You were only ever meant to be a demonstration of his power. Proof that he could take the cursed girl and then discard her in front of everyone. Elowen could not breathe. Why would he? Because Seraphine convinced him it would cement his status. Because humiliating you publicly proves he is strong enough to take what he wants and throw it away. Because... Brinley's eyes glistened with tears. Because they have always hated you, and this is their final victory. 12 years. 12 years of swallowing insults. 12 years of bleeding quietly. 12 years of believing that if she just endured long enough, something would change. And it had all been leading to this. Come with me, Brinley urged. Right now. We can... The tent flap opened. 2 of Theron's personal guards stepped inside, their expressions blank. The Alpha requests your presence, one said to Elowen. The ceremony begins at sunset. You are to be prepared. Brinley reached for her hand, but Elowen pulled away. If she ran now, they would hunt her. If she ran now, Brinley would suffer for helping her. There was no escape. I will come, she said, her voice hollow. The guards flanked her as she walked toward the great hall, toward the ceremony that would destroy her, toward the final humiliation she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. The wooden wolf pressed against her heart like a dying ember. You promised, she thought, and did not know if she was praying or grieving. You promised you would come back. But promises made by starving boys in blizzards meant nothing in the face of power and politics and cruelty. She had always known that. She had simply been too foolish to accept it. The great hall blazed with torchlight. Every member of Thornhaven Pack had gathered for the ceremony, elders in their formal robes, warriors in polished leather, nobles draped in silk and satisfaction. Elawan stood at the center of the sacred circle, wearing a white dress that felt like a shroud, her hair unbound as tradition demanded. Theron approached from the Alpha's dais, his smile wide and warm and utterly false. "You look beautiful," he murmured, taking her hands in his. Elawan said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The elder began the ritual words, ancient phrases about bonds and loyalty and eternal union. And Theron, right on cue, released her hands and stepped back. "I cannot complete this claiming," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "My wolf rejects this bond. The woman before you is unworthy, cursed, bloodless, tainted. I will not shackle myself to misfortune." The gasps came first, then the whispers, then the laughter, Seraphine's laughter, bright and triumphant, cutting through the hall like shattered glass. Elawan felt her knees threaten to buckle, the white dress suddenly suffocating and every breath a battle. She stood alone in the sacred circle, every eye fixed on her devastation. "This is it," she thought numbly. "This is how I end." And then the great doors exploded inward. The wind that swept through the shattered doors carried the scent of pine and snow and something older. Something that made every wolf in the hall freeze with instinctive recognition. Dominance. Not the casual authority of an alpha managing his territory. This was something else entirely. This was power so vast it pressed against the walls like a physical force, demanding submission from everything it touched. Kale walked through the ruined doorway as if he had not just destroyed oak, reinforced with iron. His two companions flanked him, a scarred woman with silver hair and a massive man whose arms were thick as tree trunks, but every eye in the hall was fixed on the figure at their center. He had changed clothes since Elawan last glimpsed him. Gone were the traveling leathers. Now he wore black from throat to boot, the only color a silver clasp at his shoulder shaped like a wolf devouring the moon, the sigil of the Northern Dominion. His eyes swept the hall, glacial and merciless, before settling on the frozen tableau at its center. On Elawan, standing alone in the sacred circle. On Theron, whose confident smirk had curdled into something closer to terror. "I believe," Kale said, his voice carrying without effort, "that I arrived just in time." Alpha Brennan surged forward, his face purple with outrage. "Hi, Alpha Kale. This is a private ceremony. You have no right." "I have every right." Kale did not raise his voice, but Brennan stopped as if struck. "The woman in that circle was promised to me 12 years ago. Any claim made upon her by another is invalid." The silence that followed was absolute. Elawan felt her heart stop. Her lungs refused to draw breath. The wooden wolf beneath her dress burned like a brand against her skin. Promise to him. He remembers. Theron recovered first, his voice climbing toward hysteria. "This is absurd. She is nothing. A cursed orphan. A bloodless. She is the girl who saved my life." Kale's gaze shifted to Theron, and something in it made the other man stumble backward. "She found me dying in a blizzard. She shared her food, her warmth, her hope when she had precious little of any to spare. She looked at a broken, starving pup that the world had thrown away and saw something worth saving." He began to walk forward, each step deliberate, predatory. "I made her a vow that night. I told her I would return. I told her I would become Alpha, and I told her I would claim her so that no one would ever call her cursed again." He stopped at the edge of the sacred circle, his winter storm eyes finding Elawan's. "I am not in the habit," he said softly, "of breaking my promises." Elawan could not move, could not speak, could only stare at the man who had once been a boy she had wrapped in her coat and fed strips of dried venison while death howled outside. "This is an outrage!" Seraphine's voice cut through the silence, shrill with fury. You cannot simply walk into another alpha's territory and claim, I can. Kyle did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Elowin. I am High Alpha of the Northern Dominion. My territory spans from the frozen reaches to the Ashmark Valley. I command 12 packs and 40,000 wolves. And I am telling you, all of you, that this woman is mine. She has been mine since she pressed her small hand against my chest and told me she would not let me die. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, fingers open. An offering. The question is whether she will have me. Elowin stared at that hand. The same hand she had once held through a night of howling wind. The same hand that had pressed a wooden wolf into her palm and promised to return. Around her, the hall erupted into chaos. Shouted protests from the elders, furious demands from Brennan, Seraphine screaming something about tradition and propriety. But it all faded to distant noise, meaningless static against the roaring in Elowin's ears. He came back. He remembered. He is asking, not taking. Offering, not demanding. Her hand moved before her mind could catch up. Her fingers found his, and the moment their skin touched, something inside her cracked open. A warmth spreading through her chest, a recognition that went deeper than memory. Kale's fingers closed around hers, gentle but unshakable. Then it is done, he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Before witnesses, before the sacred circle, before the old gods and the new, I claim this woman as my mate. Any who challenge this claim challenges me. His eyes swept the hall, lingering on Brennan, on Theron, on Seraphine. I welcome any challengers who wish to try. No one moved. No one breathed. Kale turned back to Elowin, and for a moment, just a moment, the cold authority melted from his expression, replaced by something almost vulnerable. I am sorry I took so long, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. I had to become worthy of you first. Elowin felt tears spill down her cheeks. She could not stop them, did not want to. You were always worthy, she whispered back. Even when you were starving and broken. Even then. Something fierce and tender blazed in his winter storm eyes. Then he turned, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm, and walked her out of the great hall, past the gaping nobles and the furious Alpha and the shattered remains of every humiliation she had ever endured. Behind them, the sacred circle lay empty, and ahead, everything had changed. The chambers Kale commanded for them were in the eastern tower, the finest guest quarters Thornhaven possessed, though Elowin suspected Alpha Brennan had offered them through gritted teeth. She stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the compound she had called home for 12 years, and felt like a stranger in her own skin. You have not spoken since we left the hall. Kale's voice came from behind her, quiet and careful. She heard him move closer but stop several feet away, maintaining distance. I do not know what to say. Her own voice sounded foreign. 3 hours ago I was preparing to be publicly humiliated. Now I am... She paused, searching for words that would not come. I do not even know what I am now. You are my claimed mate. A pause. If you wish to be. Elowin turned. Kale stood in the center of the room, his formal black coat removed, his shirt unlaced at the throat. Without the armor of authority, he looked younger. More like the boy she remembered. You gave me a choice in there, she said slowly, in front of everyone. You asked if I would have you. Yes. Why? You are High Alpha. You could have simply taken what you wanted. No one would have stopped you. Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Because I know what it feels like to have choices taken from you, to be treated as a thing to be used and discarded. He moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. I did not survive the northern mountains by becoming the same kind of monster that tried to destroy me. Elowin felt her chest tighten. What happened to you? After you left? That is a story for another night. He turned back to her, and the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something more guarded. Tonight you should rest. Tomorrow there will be challenges to face. Brennan will not accept this quietly. I know. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her throat since the Great Hall. Why did you wait? You have been here for days. Why did you let the ceremony begin before? I needed to see. His jaw tightened. I needed to know if you had chosen him willingly. If you had found happiness with another, I would have. He stopped, the words seeming to cost him. I would have let you go, even if it destroyed me. The confession hung between them, heavy with 12 years of waiting. I never chose him, Elowen whispered. I was surviving. That is all I have ever done. Kale crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands clenched at his sides as if restraining himself. You will never just survive again, he said, his voice rough. I swear it on my mother's grave. I swear it on every drop of blood I have spilled to build my kingdom. You will never be hungry or cold or afraid or alone, not while I breathe. Elowen felt tears threatening again. You cannot promise that. Watch me. Elowen opened her mouth to respond. A pounding at the door shattered the moment. Kale's expression hardened instantly, the tender man vanishing behind the mask of the High Alpha. He crossed to the door and wrenched it open. Brennan stood in the corridor, flanked by 6 of his warriors. His face was mottled with barely contained rage. We need to speak, the Alpha growled. Now, about the insult you have dealt my house. The only insult I witnessed tonight, Kale replied coldly, was the treatment of a woman under your protection. A woman your nephew intended to publicly destroy for sport. She is nothing. Accursed. She is mine. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. And if you speak of her that way again, Brennan, I will forget that we are meant to be discussing alliance terms and remember that I have conquered territories far larger than yours with far less provocation. Brennan's warriors shifted uneasily. The Alpha himself had gone pale. This is not over, he managed. No, Kale agreed. It is not. Tomorrow, at dawn, we will settle this properly. Gather your council. Bring your grievances. And bring your nephew. I have questions for him about how he treats women in his care. He closed the door in Brennan's face. When he turned back to Elowen, some of the ice had thawed from his expression. That could have gone better. Despite everything, Elowen felt a laugh escape her, broken and bewildered, but real. You just threatened to conquer an Alpha in his own territory. I have threatened worse for lesser reasons. The corner of his mouth twitched. Get some rest, Elowen. Tomorrow will be difficult. He moved toward the adjoining chamber, and Elowen realized with a start that he intended to sleep separately. You do not have to. Yes. He paused at the door, not looking back. I do. When you come to me, it will be because you want to, not because you feel obligated, not because you are grateful, not because you have nowhere else to go. The door closed softly behind him. Elowen stood alone in the firelight, her heart racing, the wooden wolf warm against her chest. And for the first time in 12 years, she felt something that was not mere survival. She felt hope. Dawn came with blood. Not literal blood. Not yet. But the council chamber felt soaked in it nonetheless. The tension was a living thing, coiling around the assembled wolves like smoke. Elowen sat at Kale's right hand, a position that drew poisonous glares from every corner of the room. Seraphine looked as if she had swallowed broken glass. Theron would not meet her eyes. Let us dispense with pretense, Kale said, his voice cutting through the hostile silence. You are angry that I claimed a woman you consider beneath your notice. I am angry that you allowed her to be treated as disposable refuse for 12 years despite her service to your pack. We can circle these grievances endlessly, or we can address the real issue. Which is? Brennan's voice was tight. The alliance I came here to offer. Kale let the words settle. The Northern Dominion has resources Thornhaven needs: trade routes, military support, access to the mountain passes. I was prepared to negotiate generous terms. I still am. His gaze swept the council. But my mate will be treated with the respect her position demands. Any insult to her is an insult to me, and insults to me tend to have consequences. The negotiations lasted hours. Elowen watched Kale work, watched him parry accusations with facts, deflect manipulation with patience, and deliver threats so elegant they almost sounded like compliments. By midday, Brennan had agreed to terms that heavily favored the Northern Dominion, and Theron had been stripped of his position in the Alpha's Council pending investigation into conduct unbecoming. When they finally returned to their chambers, Elowen's head was spinning. "You destroyed them," she said, sinking onto the settee by the window. "Without raising a blade, without spilling a drop of blood, you dismantled everything they built. I learned long ago that the deadliest weapons are not made of steel." Kale removed his formal coat, rolling the tension from his shoulders. "Words can conquer what armies cannot." "Where did you learn that? In the North?" He paused, a flicker crossing his expression. "In a root cellar, actually. From a girl who could have left me to die, but chose to share what little she had instead." He turned to look at her. "You taught me that survival is not enough. That kindness has power. That hope is worth protecting, even when, especially when, the world tries to crush it." Elowen felt her breath catch. "I was 10 years old. I did not know what I was doing. That is precisely why it mattered." He crossed to her, kneeling so their eyes were level. "Elowen, I have spent 12 years becoming the man I thought you deserved. I conquered territories, built armies, forged alliances, all so I could return to you as something more than a starving boy with nothing to offer. But the truth is," he hesitated, and she saw the vulnerability again, raw and unguarded. "The truth is, I have been terrified since I arrived, terrified that you had forgotten me, terrified that you would not want the man I have become, terrified that I had waited too long and lost you forever. You could never lose me." The words came out before she could stop them. "I have worn your wolf against my heart for 12 years. I have looked for your face in every crowd, listened for your voice in every storm. I told myself you were dead, that hoping was foolish, that I needed to let go, but I never could." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You have been mine since you put that carving in my palm. I just did not know it yet." Kale made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes." The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, 12 years of longing compressed into the soft press of lips. Then Elowen's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and gentle became something else entirely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kale pressed his forehead to hers. "I will wait," he said raggedly. "As long as you need. I will wait forever if I must." Elowen smiled through her tears. "I think we have both waited long enough." She kissed him again. And outside the window, unnoticed by either of them, the crescent moon began to rise, and something ancient stirred in Elowen's blood. The dreams started that night. Elowen ran through forests she had never seen, her paws, striking frozen earth, her breath misting in silver clouds. The moon hung heavy overhead, calling to something deep within her bones. And beside her, matching her stride for stride, ran a massive wolf with fur black as midnight and eyes like winter storms. She woke gasping, her skin fever-hot, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Elowen." Kale was there instantly, his hand on her shoulder, his face tight with concern. At some point in the night, they had fallen asleep tangled together on the settee, too exhausted and too unwilling to separate for proper beds. "What is wrong?" "I do not—" She pressed a hand to her chest, where a presence was stirring, pushing. "Something is happening to me." Kale went very still. "What do you feel?" "Heat, pressure, like something is trying to—" She gasped as a wave of sensation rolled through her, making her back arch. "Trying to get out." His eyes widened. "That is not possible." "What? What is not possible?" But he was already moving, helping her to her feet, guiding her toward the door. "We need to get outside, now. The inner courtyard, it should be empty at this hour." "Kale, what is happening to me?" He stopped, turning to face her, and she saw something in his expression she had never expected to see on the High Alpha's face. Awe. "Your wolf," he said softly. "Your wolf is waking up." The courtyard was silver with moonlight when they reached it. Elowen collapsed to her knees on the frost-hardened grass, her body convulsing with sensations she could not name. The heat was unbearable now, building and building like pressure behind a dam. "They said I was bloodless," she gasped. "They said I had no wolf, that I was cursed, broken." They were wrong. Kyle knelt beside her, his hand steady on her back. "Elowen, listen to me. Some wolves are late to awaken. Some need a catalyst, a bond, a threat, a moment of profound emotional significance. What happened tonight? The claiming, the connection between us. It may have triggered something that was always there, just sleeping. It hurts. I know, but you cannot fight it." His voice was fierce, urgent. "Let it come. Let her out. I will be right here." Elowen closed her eyes and stopped resisting. The transformation was agony and ecstasy in equal measure. She felt her bones reshape, her muscles stretch, her skin ripple with fur the color of autumn leaves, deep auburn shot through with threads of gold. The world exploded into scent and sound and sensation, every sense amplified 1,000-fold. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at the world from a different height. She was looking at the world as a wolf. Kale stood before her, still in human form, his expression stripped of every mask he had ever worn. There was wonder there, and joy, and something else. Something that looked almost like reverence. "Elowen," he breathed, "you are magnificent." She wanted to respond, but the wolf's instincts were overwhelming. She lifted her head and scented, and found him. His essence, his presence, the core of who he was beneath the power and the pain. Mate. The recognition crashed through her like a wave, not a word, not a thought, a knowing that went deeper than language, deeper than memory, written in the marrow of her bones. He is mine. He has always been mine. Kale must have seen it in her eyes because his breath caught and his whole body trembled. "You feel it," he said, his voice rough. "The bond." She shifted back before she consciously decided to, the transformation easier this time, smoother, as if her body was remembering something it had always known. She found herself on her knees in the grass, naked and shivering, and then Kale's coat was around her shoulders, and his arms were around her body, and she was weeping against his chest. "I thought I was broken," she sobbed. "My whole life, I thought something was wrong with me." "Nothing is wrong with you." He held her tighter, his lips pressed against her hair. "Nothing has ever been wrong with you. You are perfect. You are whole. You are mine. And you are mine." She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "I feel it, Kale. The bond. You are my mate. You have always been my mate." He kissed her then, not gentle, not tentative, but fierce, and claiming and absolute. And neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the colonnade. Seraphine stepped back into the darkness, her face twisted with fury and calculation. The cursed girl had a wolf. The cursed girl was the High Alpha's true mate. This changed everything. The challenge came at dawn. Elowyn was still wrapped in Kale's arms, drowsing in the aftermath of the most profound night of her existence, when the horns sounded. 3 long blasts that made Kale bolt upright, and his expression hardening into steel. What is that? A formal challenge. He was already moving, pulling on clothes, strapping weapons to his belt. Someone is invoking the old rites. Against you. Against you. His jaw tightened. They are challenging your right to stand as my mate. The great hall was packed when they arrived, even fuller than it had been the night of the claiming ceremony. Every wolf in Thornhaven seemed to have crowded inside, their faces a mixture of curiosity and bloodlust. And at the center of the floor stood Seraphine. The Alpha's niece had dressed for battle. Leather armor, hair pulled back, twin daggers at her hips. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. There she is, Seraphine called out as Elowyn entered. The cursed girl who bewitched the High Alpha. The bloodless fraud who pretends to be worthy of a position she could never earn. Kale moved to step forward, but Elowyn caught his arm. No, she said quietly. This is mine to answer. Elowyn, you claimed me because I was strong enough to save a dying boy when I was 10 years old. She met his eyes, steady and sure. Let me prove I am strong enough for this too. Something fierce blazed in his gaze. Pride, she realized. He was proud of her. He stepped back. Elowyn walked to the center of the hall, facing Seraphine across the stone floor. You call me bloodless, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. You call me cursed. You have called me these things my entire life, you and everyone else who could not see past their own contempt to recognize what stood before them. Because it is true. Seraphine's smile widened. Everyone knows you have no wolf. Everyone knows you are nothing but a... I have a wolf. The words dropped like stones into still water. Seraphine's smile faltered. You lie. Then let me show you. The transformation came easier than breathing. One moment Elowyn stood in human form. The next, the great auburn wolf stood in her place, head high, eyes blazing with golden fire. The gasps that swept through the hall were deafening. Seraphine stumbled backward, her daggers forgotten, her face draining of color. But Elowyn was not finished. She felt it now, the full breadth of what lived inside her, the power that had slept for 22 years waiting for this moment. She threw back her head and howled, and the sound that emerged was not the cry of an ordinary wolf. It was the call of an alpha. Old Brennan staggered, his hand flying to his chest. Around the hall, wolves dropped to their knees, not by choice, but by instinct, their bodies responding to a dominance that transcended pack boundaries. Ancient blood. The voice belonged to the pack's eldest healer, a wizened woman who had not risen from her seat in a decade. She was standing now, trembling, tears streaming down her weathered face. By the old gods, she carries the blood of the first pack, the line we thought extinct for 500 years. Elowyn shifted back, standing straight and tall in the center of the hall. I am not cursed, she said, and her voice resonated with power she had never known she possessed. I am not broken. I am not nothing. Her gaze swept the assembled wolves, the elders who had dismissed her, the nobles who had mocked her, Theron who could not meet her eyes, Seraphine who had crumpled to the floor. I am Elowyn of the First Blood, mate to the High Alpha of the Northern Dominion, and I am done being ashamed of who I am. The silence stretched for an eternity. Then Kale crossed the floor to stand beside her. He took her hand, raised it to his lips, and turned to face the hall. Does anyone else wish to challenge my mate's worthiness? No one moved. No one breathed. I thought not. That night, standing on the balcony of their chambers, watching the stars emerge one by one, Elowen finally let herself believe it was real. Kyle stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home." His breath was warm against her ear. "To the north, to the kingdom I built while dreaming of this moment, to the life we were always meant to share. And if I am afraid, then I will hold your hand until you are not." He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his palms. "I made you a promise 12 years ago, Elowen. I intend to spend the rest of my life keeping it." She smiled, truly smiled without fear, without reservation, for the first time in as long as she could remember. "I love you," she said. "I think I have loved you since you were a starving boy who looked at me like I was the sun." "You were." He kissed her forehead, her eyelids, and the tip of her nose. "You still are." When their lips finally met, the wooden wolf pressed between their hearts. The same carving he had placed in her palm all those years ago, now warm with the heat of two bodies, two souls, finally united. Outside, the crescent moon rose over Thornhaven, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled in celebration.